What's going on, duelists? It's your boy Nick, bringing you today on the channel a test hand video for my recently updated Dinomorphia deck profile for the post-September 25th ban list and post-10 of Dueling Heroes set. For those of you new to the channel, welcome. My name is Nick. We do Yu-Gi-Oh content mainly focused around rogue and casual decks alike. If that's the kind of Yu-Gi-Oh that you're interested in, then I highly encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more of my uploads. We're working our way to 1,500 subs, and we need your help to get there. At time of recording, we are a few subscribers away from actually reaching 1,100. So I want to thank all of you who've taken the time to subscribe to me and continue returning to view my content. With that being said, I'm going to leave a link to the description down below for this particular deck profile. I decided to do test hands instead of a combo tutorial for this deck because, let's face it, there really isn't necessarily a combo of sorts for this deck. I figured it's just easier to show off its potential by doing test hands instead. So we're going to go ahead and start by pile shuffling the deck. And like I said, I'm going to leave a link in the description below so you guys can view the deck profile if you want to watch that before watching the test hands. That might make more sense. But I updated this deck, like I said, last weekend at time of recording. And Dinomorphia is a deck that I know a lot of people really do enjoy. Some people might not like the playstyle, you know, given that it's strict control deck. And its boss monster is kind of just a giant walking skill drain. But I know a lot of people still do enjoy Dinomorphia and dinosaurs in general. And I wanted to showcase what the deck is actually capable of in a real life setting. So now that we pile shuffled and got the deck shuffled a few, I'm going to go ahead and cut. And we're going to pretend this is a going first test hand. So we're going to go ahead and start with our 5-card opener. Theresia, Super Soaring, Diplos, Wannabe, and Solemn Judgment is our 5-card opening grip. So what we're going to do with this particular hand is go ahead and start things off by normal summoning Dinomorphia Theresia and using her effect to go ahead and set a Dinomorphia trap directly from our deck to our side of the field. Now, generally what you're trying to do is set up a Rexstrom play during the opponent's turn. Rexstrom is the Dinomorphia boss monster, which is the walking skill drain. You basically want to try your hardest to get to this card on their turn, given that it prevents them from playing, which is pretty much the deck's main goal. So in order for us to achieve that, we're going to go ahead and set a copy of Dinomorphia Frenzy off of our Theresia effect. Now, you could set the domain and effectively achieve the same goal. I brought this up in the profile a little bit, but I didn't actually go too far in detail about it. I mentioned that Frenzy is better than Domain, but I don't believe I actually go into great detail as to why specifically. And the reason for that is I'll talk about it right now. When you go Frenzy requires you to send a Dinomorphia from your deck and a Dinomorphia from your extra deck as fusion material. If you look at Rexstrom's material requirement, he requires a Dinomorphia fusion and a Dinomorphia monster. Meaning no matter which way you cut it, Rexstrom is going to need an extra deck monster as part of his material costs to be made. So by using a card like Frenzy, you're able to achieve that. What you do is you go into Kentragina first, and then Kentragina uses her effect to copy the effect of Frenzy, allowing you to send another monster from your deck to grave and another monster from your extra deck to grave to make the Rexstrom, effectively making it so that you end on Kentragina and Rexstrom on the opponent's turn, which is nice. However, if you go down the Domain route, Domain does not let you use material from the extra deck. Domain only lets you use material from your hand, deck, or field. So what happens is if you go Domain, you have to make Kentragina first, and then you have to use Kentragina's effect to copy Domain, but then you have to use Kentragina as part of the material cost to make Rexstrom, since he requires a Dinomorphia fusion monster specifically. So what happens is you just end on Rexstrom as opposed to ending on Kentragina and Rexstrom as if you went down the Frenzy line. So Frenzy gives you a little bit more staying power, because you can end on both Kentragina and Rex, whereas with Domain, you're usually only ending on the Rex, given that Rex needs a material from the extra deck, and Domain does not let you use material from the extra deck to fuse. It has to be from hand, field, or the deck, which means if you go Domain as your line to fuse, you'd have to use the Kentragina you make first as part of the material to make Rex, whereas if you go Frenzy, you can keep the Kentragina on field. So hopefully that makes sense. But anyway, resolving the Theresia, we're going to go ahead and set Frenzy to our board. And we'll go ahead and shuffle this really quickly. We'll cut. Now, if you look at the rest of our hand, we have Diplos, a Wannabe, a Judgment, and a Super Soaring, which is effectively a reborn from the Banished or the Graveyard for any dinosaur, which is nice. So we're going to go ahead and set the Super Soaring, set the Judgment. We're going to keep the Diplos and the Wannabe in our hand, and we're going to go ahead and pass turn. Now, at end phase, we will trigger the Wannabe effect, discarding it from our hand to the graveyard, and allowing us to excavate cards off the top of our deck up to the number of the opponent's unused spell and trap zones. So assuming we're going first, they're in most scenarios not going to have spells and traps occupying their spell trap zone, which means that we're going to get to excavate 5 cards deep off the Wannabe. So think of this almost like a prosperity of sorts, but specifically for traps. So we're going to use Wannabe's effect to excavate up to 5 cards deep, and then any traps that we excavate, we can set 1 to our field. However, it does get sent to the graveyard during the next end phase. Excuse me. So if you look, we have Called By, Intact, Ferret Flames, Fossil Dig, Ferret Flames. Now, the Ferret Flames is obviously very, very good, especially for removal, given that we get our life points so low. However, given that we want to make sure that we can actually get to our Rexstrom specifically, and we don't want to lose to something like an Ash, I think setting the Dinomorphia intact off of the Wannabe effect is actually more pivotal, because now we actually have a way to play around Ash if they try to stop us from using Frenzy. Since Frenzy does use a material from deck, it is an Ashable card, and it is a bit of a choke point in my honest opinion. So we're going to take Intact off the Wannabe effect and set it to our field. We still have the Diplos in hand, obviously. Then we're going to go ahead and place the rest of these cards in the bottom of our deck in any order. So Wannabe effectively functions just like a prosperity of sorts, but specifically for any trap that you excavate off the top. And again, the number that you excavate is dictated by the number of unused spell and trap zones that the opponent has. So assuming you win first, you get to excavate 5 cards deep, maximum, which is obviously really strong. And that allowed us to get, like I said, a very great card in the form of Dinomorphia Intact. It states it's a counter trap. When a monster effect is activated while we control a Dinomorphia card, pay half our life and negate the activation, and if we do, destroy that monster. Also, whenever we would take battle damage for the rest of this turn, that damage becomes whatever half of our life would be at the time we would take it. So Intact is a very, very powerful Dinomorphia counter trap. And then, like I said, we'll keep the Diplos in the hand for follow-up. And that's pretty much our end board. So we'll pass turn. On the opponent's turn, obviously we want to go ahead and use our copy of Frenzy. What's nice about this is that even if they had like Lightning Storm or Evenly, we have the Judgment to eat that up anyway, which is really nice. But we can go Frenzy, pay half our life. Again, if they do have the Ash, we have the Intact to stop it. And there's nothing they can do about it because it's a counter trap. And Red Reboot is still banned, at least for our TCG players. So they basically get cooked in that exchange. So they could try to Ash this, but again, we have the answer to it anyway. If they don't Ash, then we still have Intact as just another form of disruption, to negate a monster effect that the opponent activates from anywhere. But we'll go Frenzy. We're going to send a Stealth Bergia from the extra deck to grave. And we'll send a... Let's see, what do I want to send? I guess we could send a Diplos from our deck to the graveyard. We'll go ahead and resolve the Frenzy. We're going to assume that they did try to Ash us, so we went in Intact to stop that. And we're going to make our copy of Kentragina. Keep in mind, we've already halved our life twice at this point. Once for the Frenzy, once for the Intact, since they, tried to use an Ash. So we're already down to 2,000 life points. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use Kentragina's effect. Mind you, this is all on the opponent's turn specifically. We're going to banish the Frenzy from our graveyard, pay half our life points again, bringing us down to 1,000. And now Kentragina's effect becomes Frenzy's effect and allows us to fuse. So we'll send a Theresia from our deck to grave, and we'll send a Kentragina from our extra deck to grave. And we'll effectively use Frenzy's effect again, but it's Kentragina's effect copying Frenzy, and that's how we're going to make our Rexstrom on our opponent's turn. Now keep in mind, if you've been paying attention, assuming we started with 8,000 life, we've halved our life 3 times at this point, which means that at resolution of all this, we will be at 1,000 life points exactly. Which means that Rexstrom, you know, now that he's on the field, any monster that your opponent has on their field that has more attack than our life, or equal to or more attack, they cannot activate their effects. So they're effectively locked under a skill drain at this point. Also, as a quick effect, Rexstrom can make it so that he can change the attack of all face-up monsters the opponent controls to become equal to what our life is. He does pay half of our life to use that effect, which means if we do that, we would drop from 1,000, which we supposedly are currently, to 500. And then everything that the opponent controls becomes 500 attack. Because he modifies stats, he can use that in the damage step. So if, let's say they summon like a Baron de Fleur, for example, they can't even use Baron's negate because Baron's attack already exceeds our life. And Rexstrom prevents them from activating monsters' effects whose has more attack than life. So they can't use Baron to, you know, stop that. So if they go battle phase in the damage step, we could just go Rexstrom, pay half our life, because obviously Baron is 3k, Rexstrom is 3k, so they could try and just, you know, kamikaze their Baron into our Rex. We can, during damage step, use Rexstrom's effect because it does modify stats, paying half our life, dropping us to 500, and then Baron's attack becomes 500 attack in the damage calc, and, you know, they crash into us, they take 2,500 damage, and the Baron dies. So that's pretty much what we're going for. Mind you, we still have the Super Soaring to recover a dinosaur from our graveyard or banner zone, and we also still have Judgment as well, which would also pay our life, half of our life again. So that's pretty much what the first test hand produces, and in the event that we were to be killed by battle, or by some type of battle damage, we could use the graveyard effective intact, banishing it during the damage step to prevent us from taking battle damage from that particular battle. So that's going to wrap up our first test hand with this particular deck. Let's dive into another test hand. Hopefully you guys can start seeing how this deck comes together. Obviously Rexstrom is just a house of a card and makes it very, very difficult for your opponent to try and play, obviously, given that it is a walking skill drain for the most part. So we're going to pile shuffle up again, and we're going to see what we can do. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the content. Like I said, I've been putting some pretty cool stuff together for you guys. I have tons of stuff on the channel. So if you are new here, feel free to look at some of my older videos. You may find something that catches your interest. And like I said, if you're watching this now and you're not subscribed, subscribe. It doesn't cost you a thing, and all it does is benefit the channel in the long run. We are working our way to our 1,500 subscriber goal, and I can't get there without your help. So hopefully you guys can do me that solid and subscribe. It would absolutely mean the world to me. You know, I'm going to continue bringing you guys really unique content that you really won't find anywhere else in the YugiTube community specifically. So with that being said, we're going to play this out as a going second. Now, Dinomorphia is a deck that generally doesn't want to be going second. It can go second, but again, that is post side. Generally, this deck does want to go first, but if you do lose the die roll in game 1 and you are going second, depending on what you're going up against, it's not the end of the world. So we're going to play this out like a go second hand. Excuse me while I take a drink of water there. So we're going to pretend we're going second. We got Diplos in the opening grip, intact, Wannabe, Frenzy, and another Diplos. So unfortunately we didn't draw into any hand traps. However, we do have the Wannabe. So assuming we're going second, Wannabe's effect triggers during the end phase, which means it's either player's end phase as a trigger. So what's insane is that when the opponent ends their turn, we could actually go Wannabe effect if you wanted to, before we start our turn. And depending on how many unused spell trap zones they have, we can excavate that many. So let's just say, for the sake of, again, we're going second, let's just assume the opponent has one set back row. So that means in this case, at end phase, we're only going to excavate 4 cards deep, assuming they have at least one set back row. So we got Wannabe, Super Soaring, Frenzy, and Flower Dino. Now, I know you would think you want to grab the Frenzy. The problem with Frenzy is that it can only be used on the opponent's main phase specifically, and the Wannabe is going to put us on a restriction that the trap we set off of her effect goes to the graveyard at the next end phase, which would be the end of our turn. And that means Frenzy will never get a chance to activate. So we might just want to go ahead and set the Super Soaring. I mean, it really depends, like what their end board looks like. But I don't think we're going to get much value off Frenzy unless you just want it in the graveyard anyway. Which isn't terrible either because it does have a grave effect. But for the purposes of this, we're just going to set our Super Soaring and then place the rest of the cards on the bottom of our deck in any order. And now we're going to draw for turn. Again, this is pretending we're going second. We will be drawing into a copy of Dinomorphia Alert to start our turn. So yeah, so we're pretty much going to go ahead and normal summon Diplos. Activate Diplos effect. We're going to try to get a Theresia in rotation. So we're going to use Diplos to send a Theresia to our graveyard. Just that way, if Diplos does get destroyed, we can at least float into our starter, which is really nice. And with that being said, we're just going to set a bunch of stuff. We'll set the Intact. We do have access to Frenzy, luckily, and we'll set the Alert. I guess what we can do in this particular instance is we can just try to go battle phase. Well, actually, no, I guess that won't work because we don't have a trap in our graveyard anyway. So even if Diplos does get destroyed, Diplos and Theresia can float, but you have to banish a trap from grave as cost. I was going to say we could try and kamikaze the Diplos into something, and then using its floating effect to summon a Theresia, but the problem with that is we don't have a trap in our graveyard to banish at the moment, so that won't really work, unfortunately. So I guess we can just pass turn. End phase Wannabe's restriction does apply, so unfortunately our Super Soaring that we got off of it will have to be sent to grave. And then we'll just pass turn. And what we'll try and do here is play on the turn, on the opponent's turn 3, because we already have our Frenzy, which allows us to get to our Rexstrom line, and we have the Intact to stop any monster effect that would try to negate the Frenzy, or like an Ash, for example, or even like an Omni negate. If we go Frenzy and they chain like Baron, for example, assuming they have a Baron on field, we could just chain the Intact in response, completely negating and destroying the Baron, and they can't say anything about it because it is a counter trap, which is obviously very, very strong. And then we also do have Alert, so we do, aside from Super Soaring, we also have the Alert to go ahead and revive some of our cards out of our graveyard. Again, the deck, assuming this is like pre-side, going second can be a bit of a uphill battle, especially depending on what the opponent ends on. But make no mistake, we do have a pretty decently, put together side deck. So going second post game 1 isn't really an issue for the most part. We have a lot of answers to things that, the opponent may try to end on. For the most part. So let's do one more test hand before we wrap things up. I don't want to make this video terribly long. But again, just keep that in mind. This is a full-blown control deck, and like most control decks, generally game 1, if they lose the die roll, going second isn't really ideal for them anyway. So it's not like it's necessarily the deck's fault, it's just the type of deck that it is. Because it doesn't matter what kind of control deck we're playing, whether that's, Labyrinth or Eldritch or Trap Trick, for example. Going second with most of those strategies into an established board, depending on how insane that end board is going to lead to our demise game 1 most of the time to begin with. Regardless of the type of deck you're playing. So it's not really Dinomorphia's fault. That they are better positioned going first. It's just that's most control decks in general. But again, use the side deck to your advantage post game 1, and if you do have to go second, the side has a lot of answers for that, so just be conscious of that. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and cut, and this last test hand we're going to do is going to be like we're going first, given that this deck's more advantageous when going first, especially game 1. So we're going to pretend this is a going first hand. We got Trap Tracks, we have Ash, Theresia, another Theresia, and an Alert. So this hand is a little interesting. Assuming we're going first, we're of course going to normal summon Theresia, use Theresia's effect. We're going to, in this case, set a copy of Frenzy. That's usually what you're going to be setting majority of the time off of her, because Frenzy is what you want to use to get into your Kentragina and Rexstrom line on the opponent's turn. Then we're going to go ahead and set the Trap Tracks and set the Alert. And we'll keep the Ash and the Theresia in hand for follow-up. Past turn, obviously, we do have an Ash to slow the opponent down, which is really nice, but we are going to try and use the Frenzy. Now, unfortunately, we did not have access to Intact, so if they do have an Ash on the Frenzy, I'm not going to lie, that is going to be pretty impactful. that is going to, hurt us a lot. But the solution to that problem, if the Frenzy does get ashed, we do have a copy of Trap Tracks, which allows us to destroy a monster we control to set any trap from our deck. However, we can only activate one more trap card after that. The trap that we set off Trap Tracks can be used that same turn. So we can use Trap Tracks to get us into Domain, assuming Frenzy does get ashed. And then we can go Domain and try and get to our Rexstrom that way, in case they do ash this. But if they don't ash the Frenzy, then we're pretty much good to go, because we'll just do the same combo we did in our first test hand, where we go Frenzy, make our Kentrigina, banish the Frenzy to copy its effect, and then effectively use Kentrigina's effect as Frenzies to make the Rexstrom, and we'll have Kentrigina plus the Rex, putting our opponent under the Rexstrom lock pretty quickly, obviously. So that's basically gonna finish up this video. I didn't want it to be too long, and obviously making a combo tutorial for this deck doesn't really make much sense because it is a control deck. The combo is set 5 pass and laugh. So I felt that doing a test hand for this deck list was a lot better. But let me know what you guys think of this deck in the comments down below. Also, let me know if you want to see this deck in a live duel. I can definitely arrange that. I do live duels on my channel, and I haven't done one recently. But I can definitely try to, get together with my close friend who helps me record content, and we can definitely try and do something for you guys. If you want to see this deck in action in a live duel, comment down below, like the video, obviously subscribe if you haven't already. A link in the description down below for the deck profile. If you missed out on that, be sure to watch it. Again, this is post the September 25th ban list. And like I said, I think this deck is pretty well positioned this format. Now that especially Kashtira is gone, I think a lot of different decks have an opportunity to, come out of the woodwork, so to speak, and show what they can do. So this is definitely no exception to that rule. But with that being said, guys, that's going to wrap up this test hand video. This is going to be Nick hitting that end phase, and we will see you in the next one. Peace.